begin by chanting the opening prayers. So would you all please join me? Please sit comfortably in any posture, sitting with your back straight, back, neck and head in a straight line. Close your eyes gently and relax the expression on your face. Relax your shoulders and relax your belly. Bring your attention into the belly, and as you inhale, let the belly expand. As you exhale, let the belly return. Keep the attention in the belly. Now bring your palms together in Namaskar Mudra at the heart center, pressing the palms together gently, touching the fingers together gently, and gently touching the back of the thumbs into the chest. Now bring your attention to the hollow space between the palms. We're going to chant Om 3 times and then the opening prayer, Sahana Bhavatu. Exhale completely. Take a deep breath. Inhale. 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 Inhale and chant. Sahana Bhavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Saha Viryam Karvavahai, Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Gently bow forward in a sense of surrender. Come back up, breathing in. Rub your palms together to generate some heat. Gently shield your eyeballs with your warm palms to transfer that heat. Then blinking, open your eyes and pull your palms back like an open book. Namaskar. Namaskar and welcome to today's very special session. To have Philip G with us today. Just 1 second, my speaker just... It's quite a treat to have Philip Goldberg ji here with us today as our speaker. He is quite well known to most of us, I'm sure, through all his books that he's written over the years. I first met Phil ji at a yoga conference I was part of organizing 8 years ago. And then we've been meeting on and off at different events. Philip ji, just a quick introduction, is an interfaith minister. He's a spiritual counselor and a meditation teacher who was trained in 1970 by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Philip ji has been, he's a very well-known author. I'm sure you already have, many of us already have his previous books, American Veda, as well as Awake, the biography of Paramahansa Yogananda, which it happens to be quite an auspicious time that we're meeting Philip ji today, because of course we're celebrating the centenary of Yogananda ji's arrival in the United States. Last year when I met Philip ji, he was in the mad rush to finish his work on the book, which I thought was an intriguing topic, but of course it was 2019 and I didn't know better. But so the topic is, of course, his book is Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times. And of course, as you know, how it turned out, 2019 was not crazy enough. So obviously Philip ji is quite a seer who has the gift of foresight, having seen all the craziness that's around us. So
I would love to take credit for that.
Thanks for bringing it up, Philip, if you hadn't. So, Philip ji, let me introduce you to the audience. We're people who've been coming together for the last 6 months as part of the Community for Immunity. It has, believe it or not, been more than 6 months. We've been doing 6 to 7 yoga classes every day and meditation sittings as well. And every once in a while, we have special guests such as yourself. And this is a great satsang for all of us. People are familiar with the physical postural yoga, but are also interested in meditation and deeper spirituality. So it's indeed a treat and an honor to have you here today. Thank you.
Oh, it's my honor and a great pleasure.
Thank you. So before we get into the topic of spiritual practice for crazy times, I really wanted to ask you to tell us about your spiritual journey. How did you come to be who you are? How did it begin, and what's been your journey?
Well, I grew up in New York City. My parents were committed atheists who believed that religion was the opium of the people. That's how I was raised. They were ethnically Jews, their ancestors back whenever, but they were very secular, lovely, beautiful people, deeply compassionate and kind. But they had no interest in religion. They thought religion was for fools. And that's how I was raised, and that's how I was, into my college years. I was very politically active in the 1960s when we were working on behalf of civil rights and trying to end the Vietnam War. And I was among the protesters and all that. But at the same time, life in those days were almost as crazy as they are now, and especially for young people who had any sense of right living and who wanted, to have more than an ordinary life. We were searching for answers to, the important questions of life. How to be happy, who are we, what is our connection to the universe? And in that context, I still had no interest in religion. Religion as I knew it had no answers for me. I majored in psychology, but I didn't think they had the answers either. Conventional wisdom, just fell flat at every turn. And we were searching for answers. And in that context, the literature of Hindu Dharma and Buddhist Dharma started to reach the circles I traveled in, what we then called the counterculture. And it was a revelation to me, all those deep teachings. And at first it wasn't the original sources. At first it was Westerners writing about Vedanta especially, or perhaps Zen Buddhism and yoga. And it was those Westerners, very prominent thinkers, that appealed to me and they attracted me, and they presented these teachings in ways that were very attractive. They seemed very rational and empirical and made sense. And at the same time, a lot of the gurus and yogacharyas who became famous in the 1970s and onward started to come around. And it was in the air. And when the Beatles became students of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and went to India, that was a huge watershed moment in the transmission of Vedic wisdom to the West. And I was caught up in that. I was part of it. I read everything I could. And those early writers led me to read the Gita and the Upanishads and everything I could get my hands on. And that changed my life. I was totally transformed. Um, in 1970, as Gaurav mentioned, I became a teacher of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's Transcendental Meditation. I spent a lot of time with him. A few years later, realized I was not very good at being part of an organization and had too much of an independent streak, and I left, but I retained that sense of connection to the his parampara, that traces, goes back to the Shankaracharya lineage, and that's been my spiritual home. And well, at the same time, I branched out and learned from everybody I could, and incorporated different practices into my sadhana, and expanded widely. And when I became a professional writer, any chance I could to bring in these teachings into my work, I did. And then, of course, the last several years, I've been able to do that more explicitly, starting with American Veda. And well, a book before that too, called Road Signs on the Spiritual Path. But, and that's, kind of represented the meeting ground of two great passions in my life: the Vedic teachings that have shaped how I live my life and what I want to communicate to others, and my passion for writing and public speaking, and just any way I can use language to whatever extent I have skill with it to contribute. So that's the overview. And I'll just add that I gave you a personal story, but I was very typical of a certain segment of the American population of my generation. And at the same time, very typical of Americans going back to, the 19th century and today, who are open to the spiritual heritage of India, and whose lives have been transformed by it. And so, what I wrote about, the history that I write about in American Veda, I was part of, and it continues to this day.
I find that connection that you make very interesting, in the sense that the connection with American transcendentalism and the link you trace back isn't decades behind. We're talking centuries behind. That is quite interesting.
I have a quick question before. So, I mean, I don't know if it's the right time for Philip G to answer this question.
Open questions later, but go ahead and finish your one.
Yeah, just wanted to ask that the reason why you call it American Veda, is it because you were inspired by the American writers of those days? Or, I mean, I just wanted to know what's the difference between American Veda and Indian Veda. That's all. Why you chose that to be the name?
I have to say that I wish I had used a different title. and because some people just don't know, what I mean by that. They've never heard the word Veda before, Americans. But even in India, I was getting emails from people, and I was getting criticized for saying Veda is American. That's the furthest thing from my mind. It's just that I was writing about a historic phenomenon that has taken place in America. I was writing about a piece of American history, and how essentially Veda came to America and had a transformative effect on America. And the title actually was my editor's idea. And at the time, I never came up with a better one. And it seemed to capture this idea of Veda being integrated into American life. And unfortunately, I got angry emails from people who misunderstood my intention. who thought it was an act of colonialism to steal the Vedas from India. And I always had to write back and say, excuse me, have you read the
You
book?
didn't read the book.
But
So
that was,
it was just curious question. I
yeah,
mean, maybe
that's
it should
it.
have been Vedas for Americans or something like that. I don't know.
Well, yeah, it didn't have quite the ring.
Well, you can't even say hindsight is 2020 because I don't think
But the
anybody would.
subtitle, see, we use the subtitle that explains what the book is, and that's why it seemed to be okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you,
Sure.
Latoya. So, Philip G, you've written a couple of, I mean, you've written a lot of books, but the ones that I caught my attention, of course, is American Veda, as well as the book on Yogananda Ji. So could you talk more about Paramahansa Yogananda and your association?
Yes, when I was writing, well, first, I mentioned all the books I was devouring in the early days of my spiritual path. One of them
Of course.
was Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi. This is the copy that I read in 1970.
This very book,
this very book. It's amazing that this big, thick hardcover, because back in those days, for about 10 or 15 years, afterward, I must have moved 20 times. But somehow this book and certain books about Vedanta, the very first Gita I read, they stayed with me. They were off, stored in my father's house and all that. But eventually they ended up in Los Angeles with me. And this book cost $5 at the time. And I always joke that I never became a disciple of Yogananda's, but he was one of those people who had an influence on me. And there's millions of us, people who've been influenced by Yogananda and that book. And then when I wrote American Veda, I got very, he's a big part of that story. And, I devoted a chapter of some 20 some odd pages to him. And I came to appreciate the impact he had on so many Westerners, and to appreciate also his life as a human being, and the story of his life. And so after American Veda was published, and I thought, what will I do next? I had the idea to do a biography of him. And so I reread the book, and I realized how much he left out. He left out a tremendous amount in his own autobiography, including most of his years in America. Most of the book is not about, he came here in 1920, exactly 100 years ago, when he was 27. And he died at 59, having spent all of those years in America, except for the 1 year he went back to India. And he leaves out a lot of that. So I set out to write it. And I joke that in 1970, I would not have had $5 to buy a hardcover book. So I'm sure I borrowed it and never returned it. So I joke that I had to write the biography of Yogananda to make up for the karma of stealing somebody's book. And so, but it's a fascinating life and a very important one. So the 100th anniversary is very much worth celebrating.
Yeah, it's interesting. Behind you, I can see your book. I can see, of course, the autobiography you were keeping, but I also see the other two September photos right behind you, which is Swami Vivekananda, who spoke.
Yes, yes. And, he and Yogananda and all the other gurus who you can't see from here, they have a place on my altar. I revere them because they brought these life-transforming teachings to people like me and millions of others. And it was very satisfying for me, and I must say this because of who is on this call, it's always satisfying when people learn from American Veda or my talks or whatever, how when people of Indian descent in particular, and people in India when I go there, when they learn about how big an impact the great legacy of the rishis has had on the West, it gives me great pleasure to be able to tell people about that. Oh, speaking of which, can I mention something? It sounds
Oh, yeah,
sounds like a commercial, but
sure.
you all probably know Hindu University of America. And so they asked me to do an online course, a 10-week course. And it begins October 6th. It's called How Hindu Dharma Transformed America. So I'll be doing weekly classes for 10 weeks or 11 weeks. So you can find that online if you wish. I just thought I'd let you know.
Fantastic. Great. All right, so let's talk about the impetus for your latest work, which is Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times. Now, obviously, you've been writing it before the current year. What thoughts went into the writing of this book?
Yeah,
It's a fascinating
when
book.
you mentioned that I was working on it the last time we met in person, that was at that Bhagavad Gita
The
conference
Global Gita Conference, that's right.
last fall, I think
Yes.
it was.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So now that it's out, it's been out about 5 or 6 weeks now, and everybody keeps complimenting me on my brilliant timing. But the truth is, I've conceived of the book early in 2019 because times were crazy enough then, and I met a lot of people who were consumed by anger and fear and worry about the political situation in America, cultural things that were going on, all the anger and divisiveness out there, all the madness on social media. And some were worried, some were angry, some were concerned about their children, and on and on. And I thought, and I kept running into people who were compromising their own spiritual lives because of the circumstances. And I thought, no, this is when, spiritual practices, sadhana, is vital at any time, but especially when times are difficult. This is when you need them most. This is when they have healing and value and protective value. And yet people were neglecting them because they were either too busy or too caught up in things. And so I wrote an article about it, and then my publisher said, well, maybe there's a book in it. And so we conceived of the book, and I started marshaling everything I knew and doing some new research. And I finished it, and then we were editing it, and it was being into the production process. And I also lead tours, co-lead tours to India called American Veda Tours. And we had one to South India from mid-January to mid-February. And I knew I was coming back to do the final proofreading of the actual printed book. And that's when the pandemic broke out. And, we managed to get home from India before it was shut down. And we thought, do we change the book because we're now in lockdown and there's a pandemic? And we didn't. We thought, what's in the book will apply to any time that life is difficult or crazy. And, it'll be relevant when the book comes out, but no one knew how crazy things would get. And it just seems to get crazier by the day. And I'm pleased, my publisher was very they felt the book had value for people during this time, so they brought the electronic version for Kindle and those other platforms out early and priced it at $1.99 so it could reach more people. And then the book came out and the audiobook came out, but we kept the ebook at $1.99. So, you know, people can buy gifts for their friends for only $2. But, you know, it's been very satisfying to find that the perspective in the book and the advice and guidance in the book has been of value to people. I only wish, you know, the timing hadn't been. I wish we weren't in, you know, in these tenuous and dangerous times. But I'm glad I have something to offer at the same time. And I'd like to say I was prophetic and, you know, prescient. But I just, you know, it seemed relevant last year and I had no idea what was going to be coming up.
Yeah. I read through the book and I found it really fascinating. As someone who already has a spiritual practice, I still found that there was so much I could take away. But
I'm
in
glad.
addition to all that, what I found interesting was you're writing in a very approachable pop culture style. You're not writing in a way that's so lofty or so obscure that people can't understand, and it's, you know, it's not finger wagging. It's very approachable, and I found that interesting. And also, it's not, while obviously your roots are in the Hindu tradition, you pick from all the traditions so that everyone might approach it in their own way. I found
I
that
tried to do that. Thanks for noticing that. Yeah. But you know what, Gaurav, if I may?
Sure, yeah.
Even that is dharmic.
Yes,
because, you know, one of the things that opened my eyes to these perennial teachings, these eternal, this Sanatana Dharma, was that, well, there was a lot, but the empirical nature of it, because I was a rational kid who believed in evidence, and none of the teachers who came to America, none of the books said, you know, you'll be saved if you believe in this. You know, like it was not, I'm going to persuade you and you must convert. It was not like that. It was, these are the insights of our great sages and seers of the Upanishads and the Gita. This is the wisdom that's been handed down, and it makes sense to us. See if it makes sense to you. And here are these practices. Here's meditation and yoga and pranayama and asana and puja and all the rest of it. Do the practices that work for you,
yeah,
and that suit your dharma, and see if it works. And I like that experimental approach. And then, as a result of that, I learned from, you know, core teachings. You know, I would get books from the Vedanta Society, you know, Vivekananda's lineage, and their motto was, you know, what's been translated into English as truth is one and the wise call it by many names. And I dove into that and I said, what does that mean? And I realized it expands beyond, you know, all the sampradayas and everything in India. It expands to the mystical teachings of all the world's traditions. And Aldous Huxley, who was a student of Swami Prabhavananda in LA, and of course a world famous philosopher and author, compiled an anthology called The Perennial Philosophy, showing same experiences, same insights, same revelations occurring with the mystics of all the world's traditions. And it just occurred to me that they were buried in many of the world's traditions, but that they were kept alive in India. And so the repertoire of practices and the discourse on the inner life was so much more vibrant and alive in the Hindu tradition that it made more, I wanted as much of that as I could, but discovering that you can find similar revelations in all the world's traditions if you look deeply enough was an important part of my own path. And so when I write about this stuff, I try to show that and make people who are Christian or Jewish or, Muslim as comfortable with these ideas as, people who are, think of themselves as yogis or who come from a Hindu or Buddhist heritage.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, Philip, do you like doing readings from the book? Because we would love to hear a few sections that you.
I would be happy to, but you can, if you choose the sections, because
I'll tell you the
I
section.
haven't thought about them.
Here's the section I want to hear about, which is let's see the book. The section on service I really liked.
Well, that would suit your organization, wouldn't it?
Well, talk about that. So if you could pick from the section on service, that would be great.
Well,
And also, whatever you think is, will benefit us.
I would have to, look through and see, what.
So sacred
I have
citizen.
some Buddhist practices in here. I tell you what, I will read. Oh, okay. I just opened to this page.
Which
so I will read from the beginning of that chapter. It's the last chapter in the book.
Sacred citizen, yes.
And it's called Sacred Citizenship, Giving Back from the Inside Out. And I'll skip the epigraph, but a little more than a century ago, Evelyn Underhill, the author of the seminal text Mysticism in 1911, produced a slim volume titled Practical Mysticism. She called it a little book for normal people. When the First World War broke out, she considered canceling publication. Then she realized that the book's message was not only relevant in those dire circumstances, it was necessary. Transcendent spiritual experience, she argued, quote, does not wrap its initiates in a selfish and otherworldly claim, isolate them from the pain and effort of the common life. On the contrary, because those experiences reveal to us a world of higher truth and greater reality, she said, their impact is even stronger, quote, when confronted by the overwhelming disharmonies and sufferings of the present time. And then I write, what was true amid the crisis of 1915 is just as true today. Our disharmonies and sufferings are different, of course, and in many ways more complex and enigmatic, but underlying our myriad troubles is a fundamental spiritual crisis, a collective bankruptcy of the soul that demands a spiritual response. And then later in the book, I make a case for service, for doing, and I must say that, I'm being interviewed a lot because of the book now, and I'm just finding myself speaking with even greater passion, because I think times call on us to do whatever we can to make the world more sane. And so I'm encouraging people to think of seva as not only an act of kindness, but an act of necessity, because we all have a contribution to make, and even small acts of service and helping others, or doing whatever you do about the election, or helping people who are sick, or helping people who've become destitute because of the pandemic, or just calling up your neighbor down the street to see if they need anything. All these little acts of service that your organization is so skilled at mobilizing, I think are terribly important now. And I also bring out, because the book is Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times, that it's not just an act of generosity. It's not just an act of making a contribution to the greater good. It's also a selfish act. Service serves the self. Service is, that's why all the teachers recommend seva, and every I've met many swamis, many gurus, people in India living in isolated ashrams, but they're all doing something. They're doing something to clean the Ganga, or to help the poor villagers, or do something. And every religion in the world has what they call mobilizes for acts of charity, acts of service. So, and there's research. I try to ground most of what I write about in the book, wherever possible, in whatever scientific research has been done on various spiritual practices. And one of them is service. There's a lot of research that shows that people who perform some kind of service on a regular basis are healthier and happier and even live longer. So I frame it in that way. And I talk about my own youth when I was, if you want, I could read it, but.
Sure.
In my student years, I marched, organized, and protested, mainly against the Vietnam War and also on behalf of social justice issues. As I said earlier, back then I accepted the Marxist maxim that religion was the opium of the people, and et cetera, et cetera. I found my way to the spiritual path, and before long switched from political activism to spiritual activism. I saw that social change was an inside job, and I was convinced that world peace would come only when enough individuals found inner peace. So I joined in group meditations that I believed purified the environment like a natural disinfectant, and I trained to be a meditation teacher. I used to say I was bringing light to the darkness, one mantra at a time. All these years later, that perspective still seems valid, but it also seems naive, because the world did not change the way spiritual idealists like me expected it to. Inner transformation is clearly not enough, at least not on the scale we've so far accomplished. So this too became obvious, that activism without personal transformation is not enough, but we also need to be active in the world and bring our spirituality out. And I will say to you, to this group, I say it to others, but you will really understand, and I can be more explicit to you, that, when I first got on the spiritual path and read the Gita, there were 2 or 3 verses that really stood out for me and just sort of became a frame for my life. And they framed my approach to this book as well. And one of them was chapter 2, verse 38, where Krishna tells Arjuna that the yogis, the wise one, it's been translated in different ways, have equanimity, translated inner stability, inner unshakability, in the midst of loss and gain, defeat and victory, pain and pleasure. And I remember thinking as a young man, that's what I want. I want that kind of evenness, that inner peace, no matter what's going on around me. And the promise of that really, was important in making my commitment to my spiritual practices. It wasn't as simple as I thought it would be. And I had this naive notion that everything will be great and I would never have upheavals in my life. But I did, gain more equanimity. And now, after all these years, my wife will tell you, I do not always have equanimity when stuff happens, but I recover it more quickly. So I know spiritual practices work. I know my meditation, my asanas, it all works. The other verse, well, let me say that that promise of having equanimity, of having inner peace, regardless of how crazy life is, that guided the book. That's what I'm promising to help people find in the book. But the other piece was chapter 2, verse 48, which in Sanskrit, one of the passages is Yoga Sta Kuru Karmani. I don't know Sanskrit. I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, but I've known that phrase for 50 years because it resonated so much with me. And the translation I was given then was established in yoga, perform action. Yogananda has a slightly different one, but it's the same notion. Be a yogi. And it was not lost on me that this incredible wisdom of the Gita was being given to a warrior, a soldier. And the advice wasn't, you know, the world is an illusion, it's all Maya, just, you know, go off into a cave. No, it was do your duty. You got a job to do. And you have work to be done. And you should do it without attachment to the results, but do it well and do it with commitment. But first, be a yogi. First, bring yourself to that state of consciousness that is the definition of yoga. And that is the guiding principle of the book and why it's so important for people to find that inner peace within themselves, but then not you have to come out and do something, so you might as well do something of service and of use to the world, even though you have to earn a living and take care of your kids and everything else. Do it well, do it with compassion, do it with love. Be a yogi in the true sense of the word. So that's what guided the book. And, you know, to the extent I'm a conscious human being, I tried to have that guide my life.
Yeah. So now we're going to start taking audience question and feedback, but I wanted to respond to what you were just saying, which is your subtitle for the book is Powerful Tools to Cultivate Calm, Clarity, and Courage, which is essentially the English translation for Yogastha Kuru Karmani.
Thank you. That's exactly how I felt. But you know, you can't just say that. It wouldn't have worked as a title, Yogastha Kuru.
This is great. So one question is, what's your take on Advaita and atheism? Also, given that your parents and you initially didn't believe it.
Well, you know, my mother died when I was young, before all this happened to me. And I always wondered, you know, would she have listened to me when I tell her, you know, Mom, you had a narrow view of religion. Let me tell you what the wise people of the East have said. I think she would have been open-minded. My father never really got it, but he understood my passion for it. I respect atheists. I respect them a lot because what they were taught about God and religion, I wouldn't believe in that either. I didn't, I still don't. So when somebody says to me, do you believe in God? I always say, you know, tell me what you mean by that. And then I'll tell you, you know, if I'm in agreement with that definition of God. So I try to not use the word God, but I also make it plain that the kind of practices that the yogis brought here, you know, and I know Yogananda's life so well, and he was so skilled at bringing these teachings to other, you know, to Westerners, as was Vivekananda, as was Maharshi Mahesh Yogi and Muktananda and all the others. They never said, no, you have to believe in God. They didn't say anything like that. If you were an atheist, you could still meditate and do yoga and it will improve your life. That would have been fine. And if you were a devout Christian, you could do this and you'll be a deeper Christian, and so on and so forth. That message I internalized. It made sense to me. It still does. And so people who are, you know, people can benefit from these teachings because they're not sectarian. They're universal teachings. And so I have seen many an atheist take up yoga or meditation because of their health. And then it affects their lives and they say, oh, well, let me learn more about this. And then they change their perspective because it's not, you know, the God of that they had rejected. It's a different understanding of divinity and the nature of the self and the nature of our connection to the cosmos.
Yeah, I remember reading an anecdote about some spiritual guru from India who was asked about atheism and about whether, you know, I don't believe in God, so and that sort of stuff. And his response was, well, you tell me what God you don't believe in, and I'll tell you I also don't believe in that God.
That's exactly how I felt. You know, Ramakrishna used to tell people when they came to him and they said, oh, tell me about God. And he would say, do you want to talk about God as transcendent or God as immanent? You know, whatever you tell me, I'll talk to you about God.
There's another question on TM. Your journey started with TM. Do you still practice this? How much of your journey is influenced?
Actually, my journey started when I was reading books about Zen Buddhism, and I was trying, you know, to practice Zazen, Buddhist form of meditation, but it just seemed to, I didn't like it. And then, you know, when the Beatles happened and everything, I thought I would try TM, and I took to it. And, you know, I became a teacher of it. And those years were terribly important to me. They gave me they transformed my life, you know, radically. And so I couldn't get enough of that. I would go to retreats all the time. Then I became a teacher of it. And it, you know, it transformed me mentally, physically, spiritually. And I'm very grateful to it. And it's still you know, the cornerstone of my own sadhana. I do other things as well. And I've learned many other practices, but most days that's the, you know, centerpiece of my practice. And you know, when people ask me about it, I'm comfortable sending them to learn how to practice it and all that, even though I'm not an organizational guy.
Sure. Thank you. Can I ask you for another reading? So the other interesting thing I found was in the 1960s, many people went to India, of course, but one famous author from before your writing days was, of course, Ram Dass.
Yes.
And then in your book, you have a really interesting short paragraph about Ram Dass's mention of his own guru, Neem Karoli Baba.
Neem Karoli Baba.
Page 166 in your book. Would you mind reading that?
Oh, yeah, I think I know what you mean. Because I've quoted Ram Dass many, many times. And for people who don't know, Ram Dass was a Harvard psychologist named Richard Alpert. And he and Timothy Leary became, you know, outlaws in the 60s when Harvard experiments on LSD suddenly, you know, escaped the Harvard campus, and the two of them were fired, and they, you know, became advocates for LSD. But at a certain point in the late 60s, Richard Alpert went to India because people like Houston Smith and Aldous Huxley said, if you really want to understand what is happening when people have these spiritual experiences on LSD, you should go to India and find out how people do it without drugs and what that's all about. So he did, and he met his guru, Neem Karoli Baba, and that transformed his life. Neem Karoli gave him a name. So he came back from India, Ram Dass, and he was, you know, the most famous of the Americans who were essentially became, you know, blessed and then certified to represent traditional Indian teachings. And he became enormously famous. Just died several months ago. So
page 166. This is helpful.
Yes. This is in that chapter I was reading. Oh, no, it's an earlier chapter.
Just the one before, yes.
Yeah. Ram Dass often told the story of asking his guru, Neem Karoli Baba, how to get enlightened. The answer, feed people. Nothing reduces an ego to the size of a mustard seed faster than caring for someone in need. Nothing is better than exposing the vanity of our worries. It doesn't matter if the beneficiary is a loved one or a stranger, as long as your heart leads the way. I thought you were asking me to read the part where I mentioned that Ram Dass, back in early 2000 was, it's in the section on compassion, I think, and he was so angry about the Iraq War and George Bush, and then he didn't like his anger, and he said, wait, my guru always taught me to love everybody. Can I do that with
Yes.
George Bush? And so he put a picture of George Bush on his altar.
His altar, yes, I've
along
seen
with his guru and Ramana Maharshi and all the other luminaries he wanted to honor. He put a picture of George Bush on the altar so he could see the divine in him as well as everybody else. And so I wanted an update a few years ago, and I couldn't reach him, but I checked with people around him, and sure enough, he had put a picture of Donald Trump on his altar.
Well, it worked in hindsight on George Bush. No one thinks of him as a bad guy. No one remembers him because there's much worse people now. So.
Oh yes, but anyway, yeah, that's I forget. Those are two anecdotes about
Those are great anecdotes. There's a question here on what do you tell children who have questions on science versus religion?
Oh, interesting. To be honest, I don't come into contact that often with because I don't have children, I don't have grandchildren. I have nieces and nephews, and I occasionally can bring up these subjects. But when I do have a chance, or when, sometimes parents ask me for advice, and, I feel unqualified because I don't know about child raising. But one thing I do know is that if you have the proper attitude about religion, it can be presented in a way that is not incompatible with science. That's one of the things that always appealed to me about Vedanta and about yoga as a practical sort of application of Vedanta philosophy and Sankhya philosophy. One of the things that opened my eyes in the early days was seeing scientists, Erwin Schrödinger, William James, these eminent psychologists and physicists who were students of Vedanta and who, cited the Gita. And I said, I was always told science and religion were incompatible, but these traditions are not incompatible. And it's, if you frame it in a certain way. I meet young people who of Indian descent, and you all know them, who are first or second generation Americans, and they reject even the Hindu Dharma because they haven't been taught that it's not incompatible with reason and science and all that. They just see grandma doing pujas and they don't understand why. And so that just looks like, old-fashioned superstition to them. And sometimes it takes an outsider like me, strangely enough, to, explain something different to them.
Thanks for that. Now, how do you wish, and the book actually is really interesting because you pack it with, things to do. So it's a complete guide in that sense without being pedantic. As you wrote the book and as you've seen people, how do you wish people use the book for themselves?
Honestly, and this may sound like I'm evading the question, but I want them, and I had this in mind as I wrote it, I want them to apply what's in the book according to their needs and according to what appeals to them, and to have an experimental attitude. Nobody's going to do all the practices that are in my book. they might draw some of them, they may take some of the advice, they may do something now and then 5 years later try something else. But I try to have enough diversity and variety in the book, so something will appeal to the reader. I mean, if they're opening the book, there's a need they're looking to fulfill, and maybe many. And so some things will appeal to them. And if they just exercise their discernment and tune into, the needs of their own bodies, their minds, their spirit, their souls, they'll be guided as to, what to try and to see if it works. And the one thing I ask the reader to do, that if you take up a practice, whether it's from my book or any other source, to do it the way it's instructed, and to do it long enough and regularly enough to properly evaluate it. It wouldn't be a valid experiment if you just tried something once and said, I didn't like this, but if you think it has promise and potential, do it and see if it has an effect on your life. And then if it doesn't, try something else or modify it or add to it. But I used to see this all the time when I was teaching TM back in the early 70s. People would try it once and say, well, I didn't get enlightened. I didn't have samadhi. I'm going to just, try something else now. And say, no, do it for a few weeks, do it for a couple of months and see if your life is better. That's the critical thing. Americans are impatient.
Well, thanks to Americans, the whole world is now impatient.
Oh yeah, it's true.
There have been one of the interesting things from the book reminded me that when Christian scribes were writing, or Irish, especially in Ireland, when they were writing their versions of the Bible, they would occasionally write notes on the sidelines, on the margins. Those notes and diagrams have come to us where someone's complaining about the light, or someone's saying my ink hasn't arrived, or whatever. I found an insight into your mind while reading this book, and I thought I fell off my chair laughing. This is early on in the book. It says, you write, and I'm just reading out, we are all Arjunas, whether our battlefield is a boardroom, a kitchen, a classroom, an election, or a blank page like the one I'm facing now.
Yes, that's right. My battlefield is a blank computer screen, but I always felt that way from the very first time I read the Gita. And now, I'm looking at 15 different translations. I've spoken about it, written about it. But that notion that, whether you think the battle on, was actually a part of history, or whether you think, Vyasa made it all up, it doesn't matter. But it's a metaphor for life. And I think Gandhi saw it that way. I see it that way. We're all struggling with life in this crazy material world. We're spirits embodied in these strange forms that get old and shed hair and and get arthritis, and it's all strange and crazy. And we have, things called jobs and, families, and we have to, get on the subway or drive on the freeway. And, it's all ridiculous and weird if you have a large perspective, but we're called on to do it well. We're talking about Yogananda, and I had to give a talk about Yogananda yesterday for his anniversary of his centennial. And I was quoting his take on those verses in the Gita. And it was very clear, he used to say, look, this material world, that's not the ultimate reality. The ultimate reality is thou art that, the Mahavakyas. That's the ultimate reality. Realize that. That's your job in life. All this is just a play. It's just theater. but you have a role to play, and you have to play it well. It sounds contradictory, but it's not. You know, we have, and you could think of it as a battlefield. You could think of it as a play. You could think of it as, you know, all the world's a play and we're just players, and all the world's a stage. But you have to do it well. You do your work, and you do what you have to do. Be a warrior in whatever battlefield you're in.
Wonderful. Philip G, this has been a wonderful hour with you. Thank you very much for taking time out.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. I wish we were in person so we could all hang out and have a cup of chai and enjoy your company, but I'm honored to be among you.
Wonderful. I'd like to invite everyone to join me in the closing prayers. We'll do Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina. So please sit comfortably. Sit with your back straight, back, neck, and head in a straight line. Close your eyes and relax the expression on your face. Relax your shoulders. Relax your belly. Bring your palms together in Namaskar Mudra. Bring your attention to the hollow space between the palms. We're going to chant Om 3 times and then the closing prayers. Exhale completely. Take a deep breath. Inhale. 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 Inhale and chant. Sarve
bhavantu sukhina, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukha bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Bend forward in a deep sense of surrender. Come back up and rub your palms together to generate some heat, and gently shield your eyeballs to transfer that heat. And then massaging your face, blinking, open your eyes and pull your palms back like an open book. Namaskar. Thank you very much, Philip G.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this.
Thank you for the wonderful session.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philip G. Wonderful session. I like it.
Thank you.
I'm honored. I should say that saying namaste is one of the methods I use in the book.
That was my next reading that I was going to ask you on how to say namaste and why, what it means. But thank you very much. And the book's on Amazon and everywhere else. You know, you can download on Kindle, and of course the audiobook. Phil G, it's in your voice, right? The audiobook?
Yes.
Okay.
I narrated.
Fantastic.
That's interesting. Nice.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
You know, it's funny. Philip G, one time, one of the books, you know, you autographed 2 books. By the time I left the hall, I only found 1. I said, well, somebody got it. Thank you.
It dematerialized.
Yeah.
And thank you, Gaurav, for arranging this program.
Sure, of course.
Very beautiful. Very nice. Thank you
you.
so much. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Good morning to my friends in India. All right, bye-bye.